You seem to find what you need when you're looking for it. Once you realize and you accept that you're going to have to go through training, and you're going to have to go through training your entire life if you want to grow, and it's part of the process. But it is so much sweeter in the end, because it wouldn't be the same if you didn't have to go through the struggle. We all need to evolve and put ourselves out there. And I think that as a small business owner, that we really need to look at it from the standpoint of, if you're an entrepreneur, you need to be able to market yourself, and you need to be able to resonate with a large audience. And how that comes to play is dependent on the message that you want to put out there.
Okay, let's kick off. So I'm very excited to be interviewing you for your first podcast, which is awesome, right? And we're going to go very deep into your story, your journey, and where you got to today, right? I think that's going to be a cool theme of Don't Panic, because a lot of people don't know much about you, right? They don't know your story. You've built this business, you've built many different things, and you don't share that as often, right? Which is cool. So it's going to be like flipping the script for today, which is going to be interesting. So where I want to start is, let's take a step back. I want to kind of go through some of your journey that you've had so far, right? And how can you walk me through that process as like you as an entrepreneur individually, like how you got started and where you got to basically where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely, Darren. So first off, I just, the name of the podcast, Don't Panic, I would say in business, people don't know me as somebody that would necessarily panic, but behind the scenes, all my friends and the people that are closest to me know that I have panicked all my life. So this journey has been something of growing myself, and I continue to do so. And as an entrepreneur, start off when I was very young, and that was at the age of 15. My parents got divorced, and they did not have a lot of money. And so at the age of 15, I needed to get a job. I needed to be independent. And I think through that, it actually really helped me, because what it did is it taught me that I had skills that I could hone in on. And depending on how hard I worked and what I chose to do, I could make money. And so since I had at the age of 15, I continued to grow. I always knew that I would be able to take care of myself. So something that could be viewed as something that was hard was actually not. And I owe that experience and needing to work to where I am today, because I knew I could make it.
So walk me through that process, because like that's obviously a really big event for like anyone, let alone like a child. But is that something that has kept at the top of your mind as you develop your career, almost like how you've like built businesses? Like, is that like mainly like a mental model from when your parents were divorced, and how that kind of shaped a lot of your viewpoints?
I would say that was the main thing that shaped it.
But in terms of like, that's almost like do you think you've developed like a scarcity mindset as a result as you went to build stuff, or has it been more difficult? Because like from the outset, right, you've done a lot of cool stuff, and you should have almost like an abundance mindset as an approach. But has that had that negative approach indirectly that you mainly did not even experience initially?
That's a great question. And I didn't realize until I was in my 40s that somebody told me that I had a poverty mindset. And she asked me, where did you get that? And it took me some time, and it took self-evaluation to understand that my parents were always complaining that they didn't have money. They didn't know how we were going to make ends meet at different times. And I adopted that.
This is super interesting, right? Because like history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. So it's the same patterns, unless you break the patterns, right? Which is you're actually doing. So do you think that people in your scenario right now have not confronted those issues?
I see it all the time. And I found it as something that was a gift, that somebody felt comfortable enough to say it to me and felt like I was prepared to take on that and I wouldn't be offended. It hurts me when I see it in my friends and when I see it in colleagues and just in other scenarios. The little comments that somebody would say that I used to say helps me identify when people have the same mindset.
Can you go a bit deeper on that? So like what was kind of said and like what were the actions you were taking? Because this is a struggle for a lot of people, right? They suffer in silence, male, female, and they don't they don't basically confront the problems that they're facing. So can you walk through that kind of philosophy?
Well, in this particular situation, we were facing, at the time, I had a hair care company with my husband, and we were having a lot of financial issues that I didn't think I was responsible for, he was responsible for necessarily. It was that the company was growing and growing too fast. And that was all true, but it was a small comment that, and I hear people making these types of comments all the time. This woman had complimented me on what I was wearing. And I said, you know what? These pants cost, thank you. These pants cost $15. And so I had asked her when she said to me, where did you get that? And she said, I was watching and observing you on different behaviors, but you were making an excuse for something that someone was just complimenting you on. Like, you didn't want to, I was complimenting you on something that was, just your pants. And why did you have to mention how much they cost to justify?
How do you think that's kind of set you up for what you're doing now, right? Like the fact that you're launching this podcast, you want to share a lot of your story, you want to help other people in similar scenarios. Like, what's the logic there? Do you think other people are in a similar position too?
I think they're in a similar position. And beyond that, it was such a journey for me to get here. And so in starting this podcast, I always felt as I was going through this, it was a journey that I was doing on my own. And on my own, I meant that I didn't initially go to therapy. I finally found a mindfulness coach who helped me tremendously in just getting over some of the things that some hurdles that I had within my own mind. But my journey began on searching YouTube, on trying to find videos, looking at, okay, vow of poverty, what does that mean? And finding people that would be helpful to help me with that.
Of course. And that's always going to be the case, right? Like the calls, the sales calls, the fulfillment, that's just one thing, right? But a lot of it is your business is a reflection of you, right? So if you're in that scarcity mindset, that's going to come out the forefront. It's how you're going to show up, and you've tackled that. And why I love it is because like you face a lot of fears, right? Fear is a mile wide and an inch deep. It's like we build it up so much in our head to the point that we're not willing to actually solve the problem. But when you do solve the problem, you kind of break through, right? And you go through these different elements. You are very open though to be able to experiment with meditation and mindfulness, maybe yoga, all this kind of stuff, right? You're willing to experiment with it. Why do you think people struggle to start, to take the first step?
I think it is the discipline behind it. And there's so many different options out there for people that there's not one option that works for one person. Everyone is an individual. And it's like, I would say it's almost like your car, right? Everyone has their own type of car that they want to drive, their own flavor. And you have to find your flavor for what works for you. And you can't give up on it. And I think when you're doing it alone, it's really hard to give up. And finding the right tools is just, it's not easy to do.
The thing is though, that they don't know that they need to do it. That's the difference, right? Is that everybody needs it. You need to exercise, you need to walk, you need to eat good food, you need to sleep. But most people don't realize, if you've never had it, you don't know that you need it. So the best thing there is, like, I'll give an example of sleep. If you sleep well and then you don't sleep really badly one night, you're going to feel it. And you're going to be like, I need the sleep. So it's almost like you've done that inner work. It's the internal work that becomes your external reality. And that's how you've built this external world, and how you're helping other people do the same now through the content. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I think it attracts, like, I need to call you out on this, because one of the things that attracted me to you and working with you is just that I could sense it from you that you're in a constant state of, how do I become better and how do I hone in on something? And so the cool thing about this is that you end up attracting people at the right moments when they need something and they come together. And so in starting the Don't Panek podcast, so many times I would find a message that I needed that day. And I'm like, it was like I had a friend. be searching the internet and I'd find a friend and I'd hear a message. And then I'd hear more messages along the same lines. So to your point, we all need it. It's just if you're open to it and if you're aware of it and if you're going to take a moment to, you have to be, you have to understand your limitations and you have to understand your weaknesses and you have to figure out your tools.
100%. And I think that's the beauty of a podcast, because you can attract the right people that you want. That's almost anonymous, right? People can listen, they can check out podcasts. They don't need to come and like drop you a message specifically about it. They can just consume, learn, and implement, which is the beauty of it. And then you'll attract the right people and you'll also repel the people. That woman from the pier who doesn't want anything to do with mindfulness, she won't be listening to the podcast. But I think we can safely agree that that's not going to be the end of the world. We'll attract the other people that we want to, and like that is what a tribe is. It's what a community is, and that's kind of what you're building, right? I think one thing I want to go back on is looking at some of your earlier experiences. So you were working, you got a really good job when you were young, well, a tough job. You were managing like a really big team of 200 people. Can you walk through that kind of philosophy? Because for a lot of younger people who are pushing on in their career and want to do really big things, they need to hear some of this stuff, right? And even if someone is in their 30s or 40s or 50s, looking back at some of those bigger events that you've had when you were younger is really impactful, right? And it's even impactful for me, right?
It was a combination of things. So being young and being determined, right? So being young, determined. But what I didn't realize at that point is I wanted something so bad that I put everything into it. And so at the time when I was managing over 200 employees and I was 22 years old, and now it's different, right? We hear about things on the, company, young people in their 20s managing, multi-million-dollar companies. But at the time, you just didn't hear about those things because it was a long time ago. We were isolated. I don't think it was happening all that much. We didn't have access to the internet. But what I learned at that point is I would go in every single Saturday when no one was in the office. We didn't have home offices where you could connect to the network. You needed to go into the office and work. And I would go in every single Saturday. And I think I did that for an entire year so that I would be doing above and beyond the work. I was not being paid for that. I was just going in and doing a little bit of extra and studying and reading books about business. And at that point, what I didn't realize is that there was a lot of people that were watching behind the scenes and noticing that I had this burning desire that was above and beyond people that were twice my age and had twice the amount of experience.
I always say you can't teach persistence, right? You have it or not, right? You just have that in you or not. And like, if you don't have it, it's not the end of the world. It's just a fact that it's a trait that is innate. It can be kind of developed, but for the most part, you have it or not, right? And I'd like to kind of walk through some goals you want to achieve with the podcast. So when you started it, you've been documenting your journey, and this is going to be for you to lean in and interview some other experts too in this space of mindfulness, entrepreneurship, like different verticals. But what is it you'd want to achieve really with the show?
I want to be able to offer to people what has helped me. And there are different things that you could, like we talked about earlier, is that you seem to find what you need when you're looking for it. And I often find that people panic. Everybody panics at some stage or another for some reason. And if I can give them the tools, whether it's, oftentimes I see now where people could be midlife and they're going and trying to find a new job, and they're thinking, how can I compete with somebody who's 20 years old when I'm midlife? And so they start to panic and worry about that. But when they start to panic and worry about that, again, it's a direct reflection of what people see and feel from them. And if they knew that if you could have that belief in yourself, so that's not only with just a job, it could be that you're out of a relationship and you're starting over again, whether that's dating or you're going through a divorce. It could be that you're financially, and I could not have been more broke, and I was in more debt than I ever thought I could get out of. And I was certainly panicking. And every time that I would think about it, it seemed to get worse. And then so I built the skill set to be like, okay, well, Let's think about results. Let's think about something other than what the problem is. And I found the tools that would work.
Yeah, I get you. And that's fantastic, right? It's really fascinating because one of my mentors, Ned, always says, don't have a conversation with someone who's not in the room. So instead of assuming that someone is thinking something or the deal is going to close or the contract's going to be closed, don't have a conversation with someone in the room, right? If you are assuming this and you get kind of caught in that mental anguish, basically you are pulling yourself through thorns for no particular reason. And yes, you can come to a decision, and that decision could be positive or negative. But it's interesting because usually the negative experiences do turn out to be positive. Once you have the mental frameworks, right, you can almost derail and, go down that negative path or build up those kind of frameworks. Like I've been in those positions, like where like you've no cash, you're brought up with no money, you're in debt, and it's almost like you don't understand what the other side of life is like. It's we
Mhm.
go back to that example of, not sleeping and not knowing what sleep felt like. And then when you sleep well, you're like, oh my God, my entire life is transformed, right? So with that kind of framework, how did you kind of work your way out of that hole? Like what's the step-by-step process there?
The good thing about having that mindset about money or not having the money, if that had not happened to me, I would not have started my business, because I always would have felt like that safety of having some money. And so because I had been through a situation completely broke, not had any money, I was like, well, how much worse can it get?
100. I like the mental model of it, right? And that's basically it. It's always like the way I see it is like when you have nothing and you do something, well, you already have nothing. So like how worse can it get, right? You have nothing. And that can be, you can use that as like hyperbole and use it as an extreme example when you're like starting something where it's not like you have nothing, right? But it's just a good kind of mental framework to kind of look at risk basically. And also one kind of model that I use as well, which is particularly not necessarily that bright, but it's like when you've been through really difficult things, like really, really hard, messed up things at times, then everything else becomes easy. If you can remember that, right? So let's just use divorce as an example.
Mhm.
If you've been divorced and you've lost everything, including the shirt on your back, well, hopping on a sales call is actually pretty easy, right? And working a bit late is easy. And doing this business travel is easy. And I always use that as like a mental framework because it's like you've experienced the worst of the worst. This is not as bad as that. And you've got through that. So and a lot of athletes use this approach when they're training. They'll go through really difficult training and then they'll do events. A lot of entrepreneurs do it. It's just a nice framework, right? Because it's the fact that it gives you confidence that as a young individual, as a young person, your parents were divorced. That was extremely traumatic on your body, your mental frameworks, but you got through it, right? You were like 15.
Mhm.
So now everything else is kind of like this, right? To some degree.
It's so true. And I don't think sometimes you can that's why they work with the athletes and build them up, and you have to do the
Mhm.
work. And anything that there's a training, right? There's a
Mhm.
training, and that training is usually harder than the actual event that takes place. But without that training, you're not equipped to handle it. And so
100%.
uh, I think that once you realize and you accept that you're going to have to go through training, and you're going to have to go through training your entire life if you want to grow, and it's
Mhm.
part of the process, but it is so much sweeter in the end because you went through it. You're like, it wouldn't be the same if you didn't have to go through the struggle.
It's the hero's journey, right? I call it the phrase is like tactical stress. It's putting yourself under a certain element of stress so that you can improve. So let's use therapy as an example. Going to therapy is like almost like a humbling experience or almost like an embarrassing experience, let's say in the beginning, because people
Mhm.
don't want to admit that they have something wrong with them or that they have to face something. You don't have something wrong with you, you just have to face something. So you're putting yourself under going to this therapy session twice a week and you're speaking to someone and it's difficult. That tactical stress makes you change. By changing, you take on the tools, the practices that you need to be able to handle scenarios going forward. Um, so it's almost like if you didn't put yourself under that pressure, you'd still be the same individual, right? And humans of nature go back to the default part, right? Which is why people, relive the same experiences as their parents. They go back to, doing things they shouldn't be doing because we're creatures of nature, right? We go back to the curve. If you imagine a mean curve, people will often pull back to the center, to the bell, because of the fact of that reason. They want to. It's difficult to break away. I want to go through some elements of maybe some of like the vision you have going forward. Like, how do you want to see the next couple of years even plan out for your own career? Like, what is it you're focused on, especially even with your podcast too?
Look, we all need to evolve and put ourselves out there. And I think that as a small business owner, that we really need to look at it from the standpoint of, if you're an entrepreneur, you need to be able to market yourself, and you need to be able to resonate with a large audience. And how that comes to play is dependent on the message that you want to put out there. And so for me, with growing my business, I've been extremely successful on LinkedIn. And surprisingly, it has not been talking about my business at all, but getting people to know who I am. And based on people getting to know who I am, it has resulted in sales. And I would say that it's going to become more and more common for people to try. You always want to have that connection with an organization where it's either 100%. An individual. You'll stalk them on, if let's say it's a small business and you're trying to decide, like, in this case where you and I were working with each other, I did my research and watched and analyzed a little bit. And it was like, well, who is this person? Why would I want to work with them? Or how do I resonate with them?
Well, that's the thing, right? So this is a super interesting discussion because content has unlimited leverage, is the highest form of leverage, and it has the cheapest barrier to entry. So unlike capital, which you need to acquire, unlike labor, which you need to stack, and unlike code, which you need to learn, content is a low-hanging fruit for leverage, for scale. And that's the reason why I've indexed on it. Like, I'm 28, but a lot of people that we work with, they're executives. Like, this is the new wave, right? And it's funny that you said this, that people need to do it, because a lot of the first people that I started working with were CEOs who were almost 60, and they would laugh at it first. And I was like, just try it. Just share your story, share your journey, put it out on LinkedIn, connect to people. And the amount of inbound opportunity that they get from people that, yes, want to work with them and send them money, but two, also just want to connect with them and follow the journey, has been like incredible. Like, we've had some people who've closed their business because of, startup world at the moment is tough, but they were able to build businesses on the back end because of the network that they've built from their content. So it's almost like people don't buy the product, they buy the story. So they buy into Emily's story, what your values are, what you share. Yes, some people will want to work with you, but most people don't want to do what you do, right? They don't have that business that you're solving, the problem that you're solving. So it's almost like people think of it in terms of ROI, but it's more of like the ROI for your life, more so than anything. It's the brand you're building for your life, because you open up these discussions, right? Like, we would not be here if I didn't create content. You would not be here if you didn't see the content and think, oh, this is something I want to do.
It does. And I like that you're looking at it as a long-term journey, because anytime you have a business, you're not going to have immediate results. It's not going to happen within a year. It's not going to happen within 2 years. It's not going to happen within 3 years. I've been doing this for 7 years now. And it took me 7 years to build my business step by step.
It's the learning curve, right? And that's the learning curve. And this is super interesting to discuss, right? Because whenever someone wants to do something, there's always resistance. The resistance is internal, right? Whenever you've had an idea to do something, your internal brain is telling you not to do it for safety, for protection.
Yeah.
But what's most interesting is that when you do something that you know you'll be good at, like you speak really well, you hold yourself really well, you've had this business, you have a lot to share. That's almost more painful, because you know you could be really good at it, but you need to have to acquire the skills. And that's where a lot of people fall into, right? Is the fact that they know they can write, they know they can speak well, but they haven't put in the reps. So it just almost becomes like a volume game, right? Like, I'm dyslexic. As a kid, I was told to never read or write again. I write every single day for the past 4 years straight. And I would argue my writing is pretty damn good at this stage. But it was the fact of all the embarrassment, just writing, to the point where you break that threshold.
I love that you just said that, because it is true. And I'm in the customer service industry where now we're working with bots. And And people do crave, they're dealing with bots and they're dealing with, okay, you're no longer able to call even into customer service because you've got chat, you've got bots. And so I think that you make a really good point, because we're moving more and more away from that human connection, although we really need it and we crave it.
So think about it this way. Technology has developed to the point whereby we don't need interaction, but the human brain and cognition has not developed because we don't develop that way. We're just human beings. We need connection, relationships, like friendship. We don't develop at the speed that technology develops. And that's what's interesting, right? There's a disconnect there, is the fact that, yes, everything can be automated and even you can get AI girlfriends right now, but that doesn't mean that humans desire that or require it basically to live a fulfilling life and an interesting life, because probably a lot of your audience have made a lot of wealth in their times, especially if they're in their 50s, as you kind of compound, you make more wealth, but they're probably getting to the point in life, and this is an assumption, which I'd like to get your thoughts on, is that at this point they're looking for more of the health and relationship side of the equation.
I think it's a definitely an accurate assumption. And I think, look, you're too young, but I think that you'll understand this at some point, because I never really understood it. But I think that at some point, everybody goes through the midlife crisis, whether they're 35, 40, 50, and you go into that self-reflection. But when you start to get into that self-reflection, you start to look for connection and you try to figure out who is relatable to me. Because at that time, it's not something that you necessarily go to people about, especially men. They're not going to their friends necessarily and talking about it. Men, when they get married, don't have the friendships that they had when they were your age or younger. And so you become wiser and you know a lot more about a lot of different things.
That's so fascinating. Why do you think people don't realize that till they're 40? Do you think between that 25 to 40 range, they have blinders on? Like, how does that awakening effectively happen?
I think it happens through experience.
Experience is the best teacher, right? And I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of like wounds versus scars. So if you have a wound on your hand, it's like sore, right? Which can be like a breakup. And the scar is like the lesson you learn from it, basically. So when you kind of come through that period, 2 years, 3 years later, like the wisdom you've acquired and the knowledge you've acquired, you can apply to different aspects of life. And that's interesting, right? It's like you're basically increasing your entire knowledge base. And I've definitely faced that, and I feel that as well. Like I've given up alcohol 2 years now, and you mentioned you attract other people. So I quit alcohol just because I wanted to get away from it. Didn't have any particular like problem, but I definitely grew up in an environment that like alcohol was obviously like very pressing. I feel like it is in Ireland, right? This is the story of Ireland anyway. But what I've learned, though, is quite interesting, is the fact that a lot of guys are in a very similar position to me, that they want to see like a better life and they want to take away from it, and it's almost like they can learn from my experiences. So one of my good friends, actually Tim Stoddard, which would be a great guy for your podcast, actually very close friends of mine. He's a huge agency based in Nashville. He used to be he was a methadone addict, and he came off methadone, and he went through all the rehab and everything when he was in his early 20s, and he built a platform called Sober Nation, and Sober Nation became the biggest resource for people coming off alcohol and drugs. And now he's a huge entrepreneur, massive guy online, an awesome guy. He's in his mid-30s, his 2 kids, his lovely wife. And whenever I ask him, like, how has he helped so many people, it's because he said he always shares his experiences. He never shares his advice. So he doesn't tell you to do something. He just shares his experiences, which is kind of the way I've kind of framed a lot of my stuff too. And as a result of that, he's influenced so many other people. And some people have gone through, really heavy, messed up stuff to do with alcohol and abuse. And as a result, he's helped hundreds of thousands of people, across America with that. And I think it's a very interesting observation, right? Is the fact that usually when you push your ideas and views, you don't get much response. But when you do it in an elegant way, that's when you could influence the masses, right?
The best way to influence the masses. And what it is relatable and authentic.
For sure. For sure, right? And like that's what we need, right? In a world where everything is like a 7-step Zapier flow, like it needs to kind of go back to like the organic message, basically, which is just helping people. You know what I mean? That's kind of where a lot of this originates from. Um, like being able to connect to people and help with people. So yeah, I want to say a big thank you for this. This was a amazing, amazing first podcast for you. It was a joy for me as well. I think it's a really good opportunity, even for me as well, to learn more about yourself and learn more about your journey. And yeah, I want to say a big thank you.
No, absolutely, Darren. Thank you. And what's interesting to me is that I remember being your age and thinking, I wonder if there'll ever be a time where I'll be working with somebody and I'll be learning from them. And, I certainly, I've been learning through you from this journey. And I think what's cool is that because of the way that technology evolved and the world has evolved, it has opened us up to a whole world of people that have unique talents, and you can make special friendships. And so I feel honored to be working with you, and a privilege to be interviewed by you, and very excited about the future of Don't Panic and you helping me with this journey.
Of course. Many more to come. Big, big thank you. I really appreciate it.